Welcome to the Emotional Balance Sheet Podcast, your guide to help you manage life, money, and multiples. Each episode, host Paul Fenner, Tama Capital's president and founder, and the proud parent of 4 amazing children, including 1 set of triplets, will provide insights on successfully sustaining an active lifestyle, career, and family through comprehensive wealth management strategies, financial education, and lifestyle planning, specific to parents raising twins, triplets, and more. Learn more, subscribe to the show, or connect with Paul at tamacapital.com.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Clients of TAMA may retain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
Research shows that parents are the most influential factor in their kids' money life development. What you model to your kids growing up lays the foundation for how they think and treat money into adulthood. So how do you model good financial decision making for your kids? How do you even begin to talk with your kids about money? Rebecca Maxcy is a director of UChicago Financial Education Initiative at the University of Chicago and leads a team of researchers who helps parents talk to their kids about money. Rebecca and her team have created a unique approach that focuses on the person, behaviors, and values of money versus dollar and cents. Rebecca's research has found that across the nation, financial education varies state by state and school district by school district. This means most parents have to take the lead when it comes to their kids' financial education. Financial education, similar to financial planning, never ends. It evolves continuously, and as parents, we can have a significant influence in setting up our kids for financial success by being open and having money conversations. Please enjoy my conversation with Rebecca Maxcy. We're going to really focus tonight on a topic that is at least near and dear in my heart, because most people know that I have this set of triplets and plus 1. So we're going to be talking about how to talk to our kids about money. And Rebecca, you are, I think, in the sweet spot or the heart of this conversation with the work that you're doing at the University of Chicago. And I think for our audience, I think a good place to start would be to kind of give us a little bit of background on you, what you do for the university, how you've gotten involved with this project, this really unique project that you're working on, and how to talk to kids about money.
Sure. So I work at the University of Chicago. The center I'm a part of is called UChicago STEM Education, and then our group is UChicago Financial Education Initiative. I am a former, or I guess I still say I'm a teacher. Taught the whole range from elementary school all the way on up through. Even dabbled a little bit in higher ed. And so found myself at the university. I've been there for about 15 years, writing curriculum around mathematics. And a few years back, a hedge fund an investment firm called Magnetar Capital came to us with a financial education program. And they had, taken it as far as they could kind of in-house and were looking to expand. And so our group, took a look at that and we continued on with that program. And in the meantime, we researched, we started from the ground up and started researching really, what is it that the kids need to learn about finances and how should they learn it? Because, that piece is pretty important. It's often forgotten about. So we spent, several years doing the research, talking to other experts, writing white papers. We did a lot of surveying the literature and, ended up writing lots of lessons based on all of this. So we basically, what we do at the center is, one of the things we do is we take all this research and we turn it into practice. So how can we, put what's out there and put it to good use and get it in the hands of teachers? And so we wrote lots of lessons, about 65 hours worth, and then we go field test them. And so we field test them across the country, urban, suburban, rural, lots of different places, just to get, a broad sense of, are these working or not? And then we really dig deep. We look at every single, student response. We observe teachers, we videotape teachers. We really look at everything and dissect all this information and then go back and revise the material. So we really, we ended up creating this single semester high school course that's currently out there. And what we're trying to do is just, get it into as many hands as possible across the country. It's a very unique program. So, so I direct this project at the center. I have an amazing team, all women, I might add. And
that's probably a good thing.
I think so.
Keep the men out.
So they're a really great group, and it's been a lot of fun. So just trying to figure out how we can really, help the space, help move the field forward, and give every child access to financial education, because it's most kids don't have it.
And that was where my next question was going to go, because this program is nationwide. What is like the infrastructure like of the schools? Do they have financial literacy programs intact? Because usually the data that I read or see, kids aren't taught financial literacy, and we'll get to maybe how you define what financial literacy is. It's not necessarily taught at the high school level. It's certainly not taught in college unless you want to pursue a career in financial planning, maybe. And then sometimes they don't even have those necessarily electives unless you go to a school that has a financial planning program like Texas Tech University or Georgia, a couple that come to mind. Right. But what do you see as far as like nationwide? Like, is there a majority of schools that have something in place, or is it the majority of schools have nothing in place?
Yeah, I laugh because we refer to it as the Wild West. So, coming from a STEM center, we're used to seeing, math or science, those spaces, and they're very organized. And this is a whole other world. And so you have every state is doing something different. Some states really, have an organized program for financial education. Utah, Virginia, to name a couple. And they've really thought about it. They have standards. Some of them have created their own materials. Some of them have an assessment that kids need to pass. Students need to pass before they graduate high school. So, and then you have states that have nothing. So it's this. It truly varies where you grow up. And that seems to us, very unfair. And that, that some kids are getting this and others are not. So, it's changing slowly. We are seeing more states start to add, standards, and then starting to add a requirement. What you often see for a requirement, though, it gets a little tricky. So, our goal is that it's a requirement for every single student. Sometimes what you'll see is it can be offered as an elective. They'll offer it, but it's not required. So you can take it as an elective. What we tend to see happening is that a lot of boys will take the class, not as many girls, which, poses a problem. So, not everyone's going to take it. If it's an elective. And so the idea is, make it a requirement for every single student. And then they're leaving high school with the fundamentals. So it really shouldn't matter where you live. It should just be something that you have access to.
So going down, even another level, like micro level, I
Sure.
don't know if that's the right word, but urban versus suburban. Nationwide, obviously you noted it's the Wild West, like every state's different.
Right.
Is there any more clarity between like an urban area like Chicago, Detroit versus like a rural area where I grew up? I grew up in kind of like South Central Michigan, and none of that existed.
Sure. No, it does. And that's, you're exactly right. You start to drill down even more, and it's still all over the place. So, in Chicago, there's they do offer it. It's, it's a unit of study, which to you could mean something different than it does to me. Downstate in Illinois, we have some schools. Everyone in Illinois is required to teach consumer education, which is a little different than financial education. But so students do receive it, but it's a little different. So we do see it's kind of all over the place. Some places, in the district, they'll offer, sort of like a 6-hour course that's online, not taught by a teacher, and that counts. That satisfies a requirement. So it really depends. Again, the state, the district, even the school. So it needs a little uniformity.
How do you think the schools get uniformity out of it? Is it a state by state, or is there somebody at the federal level even that can help? I know states don't like to be told what to do, but is there anybody that you know of that's working on this on a federal level?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely are. I think people are more doubtful that a federal mandate would ever happen, or if it did, that states would follow it. There would be a lot of pushback. I think I would say the general sentiment is that it's going to happen state by state. But again, it leaves a lot of room for interpretation. So I think the more pressure that states feel, look at what we're going through right now. And if states aren't seeing the fact that, and I'm not going to argue that financial education can solve anybody's financial problems right now, but it does give people a foundation. And I think, if people aren't seeing that there's a need for this right now, I don't know what to tell them.
Yeah, if they don't see the need now, when will they ever see the need?
Right.
So let's actually go back to help us define what financial education means. And then you actually said consumer education. So talk to us about how you define, or how your team defines financial education. And then what does consumer education mean?
I don't know if I can handle that one, but
I throw out the big questions to you, Rebecca. You're the expert.
So, financial education, to us, or to me, would be, what we really focus on is that it's the knowledge, the skills, the behaviors, the attitudes, all having to do with personal finance. It's thinking about earning, thinking about borrowing, thinking about, saving and spending, all those pieces, insurance, but along with that, you need to think about what are your attitudes, the behaviors that you learn and that you exhibit. So I think it's for us, it's a bigger story. Often what we've seen, traditionally what we see is it's strictly content. It's all, you need to learn about banks. That's what you need to learn about how insurance works, but it's so much more than that. And so we really focus on it's a much bigger picture, and it involves, attitudes and behaviors and decision making. So consumer ed, a little different. You see a lot of practical pieces there, things like how do I buy a car? That's one requirement in consumer education. Looking at how to avoid, like fraudulent schemes. How it's a much more practical approach. Some places include, financial literacy or financial education as part of consumer education, but it's a different, and I'm sure some teachers do use a more broad approach, but it tends to be a bit more practical.
So that actually leads into where I wanted to go next directionally, with really diving into the details of your approach, I think, which is really unique in that it focuses on the person and the values versus only money. So talk a little bit about the process itself that you've developed with your team that you roll out as far as this financial education goes, where it's a lot of behavioral talk and not just, dollars and cents, if you will.
Yeah. So when we were doing the research, the one thing that really stood out, and I guess a question that we really had to ask ourselves was, there are a lot of people out there that say financial education doesn't work. And so we couldn't start this work without really looking at that question. And so we spent a lot of time really analyzing that and looking at the research. And it does work, by the way. But
I'm glad you said that, because I'm a firm believer that it does as well. And it doesn't matter if you're a 16-year-old or 36 or 46 or 66.
Exactly. And it never ends. That's the thing about education. It's, you can always learn. And so, one of the things that was really interesting was that people bring a lot to the table, essentially. So they bring, their experiences, they bring their own behaviors, they bring their own attitudes. So they're kind of bringing in this, they're sort of, I don't want to use baggage because it kind of sometimes has a negative connotation, but they are bringing their own stuff to the table. And so you have to acknowledge that. You have to acknowledge that, they have experiences, whether, good or bad, they're coming in with that. And so there is a place for financial education. Like, there is a place that they can, students can learn, or people can learn things. They can make changes, especially around decision making. And so what was really interesting to us was what they bring in. What do they come with? And so when you really start looking at that, that's when you get into, they bring in their values. What's their value system? They another piece is influencers. Who influences your decisions plays a huge role in things like how you spend your money. So we could talk about that one for a long time. Your economic environment for us was a big one. So who you are. Sometimes you're limited by your environment, and a lot of products or programs don't talk about that. And it seems really strange to us that, how can you not talk about that there are things out there that are like barriers for some individuals. You have to put this out there. And so, looking at people's risk disposition, like, how do you feel about risk? Like, I'm a pretty risk averse person. And so that has a huge impact on, how I'm going to, control my finances. So those really popped out to us. And it seemed like we can't have a program where you don't address these at all. And so what we did when we created the program was really brought those to the forefront. So especially for teenagers, what teenager doesn't love to talk about themselves? Like,
Right.
I mean, that's just the age group. And so, and they love, money's fascinating to them. And so we start our course off really digging into that, digging into, what are your attitudes around money? What are your attitudes around saving? Who influences your decisions? They build a huge influencer map. What's your risk disposition? And ask them some questions so they can kind of determine that. What's your economic environment like? What barriers are in the way? And so on. And then we teach them a decision-making process that is then used throughout the course. So these threads are woven throughout. So then we start to teach the traditional content. We'll start to talk about saving and spending. We talk about, banks and sort of the traditional topics, but we're always coming back, right? So we're always saying, hey, who influences those spending decisions? Like, here are some spending tools, but who influences your spending decisions? So it's always coming back to the personal. It's always coming back to the individual, and they're reflecting on that information and how it really applies to their own life. And it makes it's more engaging for anyone, for teenagers in particular. So so that's how that became a core part of the FinEd, the high school program.
So it sounds like how you guys built this from a foundational level is more on the behavioral side, and then you intertwine the lack of a better term, like the tacticals, like
Yes.
how to handle money, how to save, those things. Because I know with research that I've read and conversations that I have with people about money is trying to gather what their earliest memories are. A good example is people that grew up in the Depression. It's historically very risk adverse. So going back to what you were talking about, the environment that you grew up in has a strong correlation to how you think, feel, and act when it comes to money as you get older.
Absolutely. I mean, it's very emotional. If you think about even talking about it, like when you bring it up, I mean, even for me, when I started working on this, I mean, it's you sometimes you start to like, people get anxious, right? You're like, it brings up all these different emotions or feelings or memories or, experiences. And so it's tough, and to start to talk about that in a classroom where kids have this a wide variety of experiences, some really positive and some some are experiencing negative things, and how people interact at home about it, how people talk about it plays a huge role in their approach to money.
Thus the term, the emotional balance sheet.
I know, right?
You hit that right on the head, Rebecca.
Perfect.
Perfect. So, because I think it's taboo to talk about money with adults. Like, even when people pick up the phone and finally call me, and it's usually because of some life transitions. And I tell people, or I communicate with people constantly, you have way more life transitions than you think you do. And whether it's getting married, losing a job, losing a loved one, all those different experiences happen way often than most people think about.
Right.
And they're not necessarily all that predictable.
Right.
And so people really struggle with these life transitions, and then how to deal with money. Like, I think of like a newly formed couple or partnership. It's that whole saver versus spender. Like, when I have come in contact with a family that's, you have one or the other, it's a very, very difficult bridge to gap. So talking about money among adults is taboo. How do you get over that tabooism, if you will, with kids?
Yeah, no. So one of the things that we do is the very first lesson in the program is we essentially set norms. And we really, because kids are going to might bring up some pretty personal things, and so we really have the teacher set the stage and really talk about this. It has to be a place where kids feel comfortable sharing things, and sort of establishing this trust within the classroom is really key. And otherwise kids aren't going to want to share things and whatnot. We also do we send home letters to parents or guardians or trusted adults and say, this is the class, and here's what's going to be happening, and guess what, there's homework. And a quarter of the homework assignments in the program are going to involve talking to an adult. And so we kind of give people a heads up and really just try and set the stage so it'll be successful.
So what is some of the homework that a parent, because that's a large portion of the audience, what are some of the tactics or homework assignments, if you will, that parents can do today in talking with their kids about money, regardless if they have access to a program like that you and your team have developed at Chicago?
Sure. So, I mean, I think first of all, the parents probably might get a little nervous when they hear that, but you can have a conversation about money and not use numbers, not discuss. I think when people get really nervous. Like, it's almost like you're going to say, what's your salary? What's your hourly wage? And then, it's like divulging what's in the vault. So, you can have these conversations and they, so just to give you an example, like one of the conversations, one of the homework assignments is, have you ever had a bad credit experience, like with a credit card or something like that, a loan? And to really, you don't have to tell how much it was, how long ago it was, but it's just just to get that conversation started and to understand, maybe an experience that, a parent or a guardian has had. And so, one way parents, first of all, is just thinking of it, that it doesn't have to be, you don't have to share numbers. I think that's just the first thing to consider. And the second thing is, I bet this is happening. I bet parents are having conversations and they almost don't even know that they're having these conversations. But you also do it a lot in your head. Like I have conversations, and we all have conversations all the time. In our head, we're making money decisions, right? And we talk to ourselves, and it's important.
Which is very natural, by the way.
I'm a big believer. Is to start to have these conversations out loud. Like, it kind of brings back the elementary school part where, you do a think aloud, where you're really talking out loud. And, it doesn't mean you have to sit your child down and say, let me tell you what I'm thinking, because that's not interesting to them. It's just you thinking out loud. They're listening. They're listening all the time, right? We don't think they're listening, but they are. You get a bill in the mail and you say, why is our electricity bill $20 higher this month than it was last month? Or why is this, they are picking up on that, and you're having a money conversation with yourself, but you're having that conversation. And, over time, they will occasionally engage with you. So I think first is really starting to do that, out loud. I think there are a lot of games you can play, with kids, everything from, the basic Monopoly, right?
I was going to say Monopoly still work.
Monopoly. Yeah, sure. And there are games that help a lot, with basic numeracy, just feeling comfortable with numbers can be really helpful for people. It's that was the one thing that we really learned was that, we thought, there'll be a ton of math in this. We're going to put a lot of math in here. And no. But it is important for people to be, comfortable with numbers, to understand, the magnitude of numbers, to be comfortable just, adding and subtracting. So there are games, you can do chutes and ladders. You can play, when we were kids, we used to call it, war, where you compare two cards and things like that. So I think there are plenty of games.
Let me interject 1 second, because this thought just popped in my head. We're talking about games. Roblox is just, when you say games, I'm like, bam, because my kids are always asking me about, hey, I need some more Roblox dollars and this. And I'm like, what is this? And I've been getting more involved in that and trying to understand what this is, because Roblox, the company, is supposed to be coming public, fairly soon. And that's going to be, you talk about IPOs, hot IPOs, that's going to be a big one. And so have you guys had any experience with like a video game such as Roblox that potentially helps kids understand, dollars and what you can get with it, value, how far it goes, things of that nature?
That's a good question. I have not looked into that one. I mean, there's always Life, the digital version, right? There's that game. But we haven't done, we're busy creating our own digital games. They're, for high school students, but I don't know that one yet. I have a kid who plays Roblox, but I haven't dissected it yet. I'll get back to you.
All right. Well, when you get that game, when you and your team get that game finalized, let me know. I'd love to be a beta tester. I've got 4 that be chomping at the bit probably. Because that's the thing is, if you can make something, especially with kids, if you can make it interactive and they're and they're learning without realizing they're learning, that's like a home run. And that's top of mind right now, because just before we started hitting the record button, I just finished parent teacher conferences with my triplets teacher. And so that's one thing that we're talking about, more on the side of reading, but how to get them to be engaged. And this is actually how you and I got introduced to each other, was through our good friend Brian Portnoy. And what he's working on is just that, and trying to build some interactive tools that get people engaged, and helping them decide what lifestyle priorities and financial ambitions or aspirations they want, and how that ties into dollars and cents.
Yeah.
So
yeah, no, and I think the one thing that we learned in the games research is really, we ended up settling on what we call non-realistic games. So more, I wouldn't go full fantasy, but that idea of that sort of genre. And because I think sometimes the games, there's value in them, but sometimes they're too realistic, and especially around finances. And so, we went with a different type of game to really get at the content from it. It's very fun. But for example, like one of our games is on insurance, and it's about I'm laughing. It's about a squirrel and collecting a bunch of nuts, and there are raids, and you need to protect your acorns, right? And so it's just we've got an earning game with dogs who are out, they're working like a dog, and they're applying for different jobs. And so it's just this idea of coming at it from a completely different angle, making it fun and engaging, but you're learning the content, but through a totally different way. So really fun and interactive.
Going back to what we were just talking about, as far as like having these conversations out loud with our kids, I think of a prime example that just literally happened to us, a week and a half ago. Is our kids have midwinter break here in a couple weeks, and we decided, we're gonna get out of here, and so we're heading to Florida. And usually if on a trip like that, we would normally drive or fly, but with COVID, we're kind of like, well, do we really want to get on a plane? And so, I figured it all out cost wise, and to drive, it's going to be much cheaper. We'll have our own, van, more comfortable that way while we're down there. And what was interesting is our youngest, our plus one, who's 8 years old, was having a conversation with me at the bus stop, which kind of got a little uncomfortable, because she's like, Dad, why are we so poor that we can't fly to Florida? Why do we have to drive? And I'm just like, I'm like, what am I? I'm a professional. I'm supposed to be able to answer this. And so I'm trying to rationalize it with her. I'm like, well, there's different factors that went into, that decision, and we're not necessarily poor, but, we have to make financial decisions, and we're going to Florida, and driving allows us to, go to Disney World for one more day. And sometimes I think I struggle with, they're kids, but I have a problem when I try to talk to them like they're adults.
Right. But I think that's a great, it was a great opportunity, right? For if you never had that conversation, what that thinking would have been like, the takeaway, it would have always been like, we're poor, right? Like, but having that conversation was like, no, there's more that goes into this decision. Like, I think that, and that's what you get from having that discussion. Like, are they going to take away everything from that conversation? Probably not. But over time, right? It's, it adds up. I mean, I think you get a lot, you get a lot of insight, as to what's really going on, in their brains and what they're thinking about. And they also get insight into what you're thinking and your decision making. And I think that's where the power really lies, is, you're better understanding where they're coming from, and they're really getting insight into how you make your decisions. So
Yeah, I've often wondered if I'm scarring them for life with their father being a wealth advisor professional in the financial service industry, because I get that, like Madison, my oldest, she's the girl triplet. She could give you a fair amount of information on what a 401k is. So on one hand, that makes me very proud. On the other hand, she may know more about 401ks than some adults.
I have this I have this debate with myself all the time. Have I scarred my children from running these things by them and testing them and really peppering them with all kinds of questions and having lots of conversations they may not be ready for.
Yeah, because it definitely goes back to the whole conversation piece that we were just talking about, and the research about how money, thoughts, habits, ideas are being formed in their minds right now, and how that will carry forward for them for potentially, the rest of their lives. I mean, it's not an exaggeration. It's like people pay good money to go see a therapist on some of these issues.
No, for sure. I mean, absolutely. I mean, even just thinking about, in my family, you just didn't talk about it when we were, and if you asked anything, not even like, it wasn't like, oh, what's your salary? It was like, oh, you don't talk about that. And so it just wasn't, so, you carry that with you, right? It's sort of like this, we don't go there. So it's a process to overcome that and really get comfortable, digging in.
So you talked about, as far as like conversation starters, one, you don't have to talk specifically about numbers. And then obviously two, as we kind of talk through this, is having these conversations out loud. I know the program is really geared towards high school students, but for those of us with younger kids, maybe that they're in, middle school or that are like in grade school, any suggestions or strategies, tactics on, how to have these conversations or conversation starters with kids at a younger age?
Yeah. So, well, out of the field test, we got a lot of feedback, first of all, from parents. So we were really nervous about putting in the homework. We knew it was the right thing to do, but we were nervous to find out how this was going to go over. It was probably one of the most positive things to come out of the field test was that parents were seeking out the teacher and saying, I'm having conversations with my kids. We haven't had a meaningful conversation in months. We're having, really powerful conversations. So after we finished the program, it was something we circled back to and really started to think more about, is that, parents are the most influential factor in kids learning about money. And so we've, while not every parent may be ready to really fully financially educate their kids, so we want to stick with offering it in high school. We definitely think there are ways that we can help, parents start to have these conversations. And it isn't, we're not trying to get at like what to say, but just how to say, just to have that conversation, just to get over that hurdle. And so we created a series of conversation cards. We call them Talking Sense. And, we created a whole set of them and we put them out there. We made it in during the first, what do we call it? Shelter in place. Is that what we called it?
Yeah.
Lockdown. So we were able to ship them all out right before and had this sort of captive audience to field test these cards. And it wasn't just families. It was, there were some friends doing it. It wasn't just parents with kids. We also had grandparents and involved kind of intergenerational conversations happening. And so it was just a way to, get people going, and the conversations, the starters, the prompts are really get at all kinds of things, things again, like values, attitudes, um, talking about, and then content too, right? So that it's it kind of runs the gamut. But again, really positive feedback, like parents saying, I wouldn't have done this on my own. This helped me get going, just having that prompt. And also, how much I learned about the way my kids think about money. We had one parent say, I never knew, my daughter didn't think you should save until you're much older, later in life. Like, if she carried that with her forever, what would have happened? And so really able to open up and have, some powerful dialogue going. So I think the prompts are one way that we're trying to help people, to help people get going. So I think, that's another place.
So if parents, again, if they're not involved in a program like yours, where can they go to get prompts like that? Where can they go to help? Because if there's not a program in place, unless they're getting the information from somewhere else or somebody like a wealth advisor like me, which is
Right.
part of what the experience that I'm trying to deliver for my families, because a lot of them do have younger kids, and I do want them to start having conversations about it. I know a few of my clients have brought me in to talk to their middle schoolers and high schoolers, and once they reach college, and like I'm starting wealth planning 101 for them. But for those parents that do want to get started, Rebecca, where can they go to find these resources?
Sure. So the Talking Sense cards are available on our site. So it's financialeducation.uchicago.edu, and we're in there under our solutions. Think about that, and they can go there for them. There are other resources out there, and I think there are other ways. I don't want to make it seem like the prompts are the only way. I think you can take things on a daily basis. I think you look at what's happening in the news. I know for us today it was the GameStop saga, and when you've got right, like a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old saying, I thought GameStop was going away. They closed the stores around here, and so I think there are ways, and you can learn together. I think there are ways that you can use the news and use current events to sort of prompt or have that conversation. There's a lot out there that you can use to really start this. It just made me think of I think the one thing that's really important is the ability to say that you don't know. So when those conversations start happening, and your child asks you something that you're not entirely sure of, it's really, you need to be comfortable saying, I don't know, let's look it up together. And finding that answer together it shows them so much. It shows them how to research, how to find the right source. You can talk it through together. So it can be really powerful.
So I know I don't have you for a finite amount of time. So if we've kind of gotten into the details, and let's kind of zoom back out one last time. So, the whole premise of our conversation has been centered around how can we talk to our kids about money? And from the experience that you've had in building this program, what would be like maybe one or two like key takeaways, I guess, for parents to be able to start having that conversation, with their kids on their own?
Just start. Honestly, just start. Say what you're saying in your head out loud. Whether you're struggling with something, I really think, we all have to start somewhere. It may not be pretty, but just start, and they're listening. I think, finding things in your everyday life, finding, it doesn't always, and it doesn't, again, like I think another real, besides just sort of starting, is it doesn't always have to be specifically about money. It can be about things that you value, or you as a family value, or, your attitudes towards something, or, a barrier that you're experiencing. It's really important for them to hear that side as well, because, look, it's, money's a part of every decision we make. So it doesn't necessarily mean that, you're not talking about it. It indirectly is there. So I think that's another piece. And again, just being afraid, not being afraid to say, I don't know, let's find it. Let's investigate and find that answer together. I think, that's, I guess those would be my big three.
I know you're probably familiar with Ron Lieber's work. He wrote a great book, The Opposite of Spoiled, which I'll link to in the show notes as well. But I think he takes a very similar approach that I think you guys have taken, where it's, I know that book is really focused on the values and behaviors. Yeah, there's some specifics when it comes to, like, having those 3 jars, this is for saving, this is for spending now, and this is for, charity, if you will. And so that's the one thing. I've probably read 2 or 3 different books on this topic, and they're all different. There's no right answer. And I think it comes back to the right answer that you gave, which is just starting to have the conversation. And, like, when Mackenzie came up to me and said, are we poor because we can't fly to Florida? That, not to shy away from that. And yes, it could be uncomfortable, especially if there's other adults around. You're like, but I think that's an opportunity that, people should take advantage of.
No, absolutely. I mean, our 13-year-old asked us the other day, how much do I cost you a day? And it was like, and it was a great conversation. I mean, there were way more numbers flying out than I ever wanted to share, but it was a really good conversation about, this is what we spend on groceries a week. And, there are 4 people. And so it's a really, I mean, you can shy away from some stuff by steering it in a different direction. I think parents are pretty talented that way. I mean, I think, there's tons of, there's all this research, right? That parents are more comfortable talking with kids about sex and drugs than they are about money. And, I think we really we gotta flip that, we gotta, or just at least make it so that it's more comfortable. But just getting going is the best thing.
Well, my closing question for everyone is, what is the best, and knowing that you have a couple kids, what is the best thing about being a parent?
Oh gosh, there's so many great things. I think watching for me, it's watching my kids really, develop and grow into these really thoughtful, caring little people. It's just and become, their own person over time, and hope that I don't scar them that much with money talk. But I think that's why I think I'm going with that.
All right. Well, I've been asking that question of my guests as a closing question for a long time. And the really neat thing about it is that there's just a diversity of answers. And I love everybody's answers because they are all different. And I cannot thank you enough, Rebecca, for being on the Emotional Balance Sheet podcast. There's a lot of good resources that we'll link to from your work at the University of Chicago. But I think this is definitely a topic on how to talk to your kids that we want to move, forward into the forefront, if you will, of conversations and into schools if we can, but definitely having those conversations at home. So I look forward to continue to following your work and hopefully being a part of that journey.
Thanks so much for having me on, and I appreciate it. And best of luck to everyone. Just start talking.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Emotional Balance Sheet Podcast. Please visit tamacapital.com to subscribe to this podcast or to connect with certified financial planner and registered investment advisor Paul Fenner of Tama Capital. And please join us again next time on the Emotional Balance Sheet Podcast.